Hello and welcome. I'm Ian Gallanar, your host and the founding artistic director of the Chesapeake Shakespeare Company in Baltimore, Maryland. And today I'm delighted to welcome my old friend, Stephen Burdman, who's the founding artistic director of New York Classical in, of course, New York City. Hi, Stephen.
Hey, Ian.
So glad you're here.
Thanks for having me.
I want to tell everybody about you, Stephen. Stephen founded the New York Classical Theatre in the year 2000, and is the vision behind the creation of panoramic theater, which we'll talk about. Originally from Los Angeles, he earned a bachelor's degree in computer science and planned to become a doctor. During college, Stephen auditioned for a production of Hamlet and discovered his passion for Shakespeare. That experience completely changed the course of his life. Stephen founded New York Classical to give all people the chance to discover classical masterpieces as he did. Stephen has directed nearly half of Shakespeare's canon. To date, he has directed 35 productions for the company. Some of his favorite productions are The Importance of Being Earnest, Two Ways, which I'll ask him about, Romeo and Juliet, The Rivals, Winter's Tale, Measure for Measure, Seagull, The 15-Minute Christmas Carol, Playing Moliere, Henry V in the Battery, and via ferry boat, Governor's Island, which I saw, which was really exciting. We'll talk about that too. Hamlet, King Lear, Miss Alliance, Mary Stuart, and The Triumph of Love. Stephen attended the National Theatre Institute at the Eugene O'Neill Theatre Center and later received an MFA in theater directing, from the University of California, Irvine. In 1989, Stephen was selected to participate in the first Young Theater Artists Exchange with the former Soviet Union and has been a member of the Stage Directors and Choreographers Society since 1994. And I'm proud to call Stephen my friend. Thanks for joining us.
I'm proud to call you my friend too.
So, Stephen, you have, before we get to all the, interesting stuff about where you are now, do you have an early memory of or earliest memory of either you in performance or you watching a performance of something?
Actually, two memories come up. I mean, there's one touched on in my bio. I did audition for Hamlet kind of on a fluke. I went to one of those high schools that you had to memorize stuff. I don't think they do any memorization in high schools anymore. And we had to do To Be or Not to Be. And then I went off to college and they were auditioning for Hamlet. And I thought, oh, I know a little bit of this play. So I decided to audition and I was cast in the smallest role in Hamlet, which is usually cut, which is Cornelius. He is the assistant ambassador to Norway. Mm. And I've done it twice since then. I've never been able to afford poor Cornelius, although I really want to. That was one, and that was actually my first experience. That was terrific. I remember, knowing pretty much every line in the production and being able to recite it and listening. The other one, and I guess this is when I started to become a director, is I acted only in college, and the last time I was on stage, I started looking at the lights and watched the lights move. And I thought, oh, I shouldn't be acting anymore. I should be doing something else. I got to be directing. I got to moving everything around. So, but that set me off onto this career. So I really haven't looked back from that. It's kind of the same.
Yeah. Is it? I'm interested because a lot of folks I've been talking to, they kind of either their path is through theater to Shakespeare or it's from Shakespeare to theater. Mm-hmm. How would you describe yours?
I think that's a good question. I think it was theater to Shakespeare. What solidified me was actually after I went to National Theatre Institute, the NTI, I was in DC and I was in I didn't know at the time, very fortuitous situation. So Michael Kahn had recently taken over the Shakespeare Theatre, was still at the Folger Library. And I literally walked into his office because he was only there a couple of years and he was just getting started. And I said, can you give me a job? And he said, well, would you like to assist on our next show? And I said, who is it for? And he told me this guy's name, and it was Michael Langham. And that's a name that didn't mean anything to me then. But then I was like, sure, I'll just do it. It's The Merchant of Venice. And I'm like, okay, this is great. So Michael Langham, for those who may or may not know, is possibly one of the greatest directors of last century. He ran the Guthrie. He was Tyrone Guthrie's protege, and he ran Stratford. He was for 10 years. He was at Juilliard for 10 years, and on and on and on. And I got to. He was alone, and he lived alone in Washington. They brought him out. We had a nice chunky rehearsal, and we got to spend pretty much every night at dinner. He had me. We always went out to dinner together, and we spoke about Shakespeare. And it was just the most amazing masterclass you could ever imagine. And it was lucky I didn't know really who he was until about, I don't know, a couple weeks into rehearsal. Then I did some research, and a book called Directors on Directing, and he had an entire chapter about him. And I was like, oh my God, who is this guy? But he was terrific. He just treated me like anybody else, and we had a really nice time. And I learned a tremendous amount.
Do you remember anything from those dinners? Do you remember any?
He had a couple real important things. He was like, always stop by the shop. He's like, check on get to know the carpenters. And, it was something that was very interesting. The idea of the director and almost as producer, really knowing everybody, touching everybody, and making sure, the artistic director sets a tone for the company, the organization. And there shouldn't be anybody out of the artistic director's mind. Every decision we make affects a lot of people, and I thought that was really smart. And then he taught me something real. He taught me a lot of things, but something really, really incredible. It was more during rehearsal. He talked about his phrase, playing on the line, where in Shakespeare, the actor has the idea on the line. So the musically, right? There's the words, and then there's the thoughts, but then you want to play them together. And he taught me, and watching him, I learned about how to direct that way. Mm-hmm. And I think that was really essential, as you know well, for particularly soliloquy. But it keeps it fresh, keeps everything fresh. And he was also very generous with me in the process. As a young, I was like 21 or 22 and didn't know too much. And he let me talk. And let me talk in production meetings. He let me talk in, somewhat in rehearsal. He gave me a little directing assignment, took a scene to the side and worked on that for a few minutes. But things like that, those shaped me. Those shaped me in such a way. And I really always considered him. I wouldn't call him a mentor, but he was the closest thing I guess I've had to one.
Got it. So help me connect the dots. So you're in DC, and you got this terrific gig at the Shakespeare Theatre, and then you go back to Southern California.
I did briefly. There was a few more stops. It's very confusing. I was popped all around the country. Not too long after, I was in Russia, and from there, I actually quit the business for about a year. And I tried film in my hometown of Los Angeles. Didn't really like that. And then I got accepted to grad school. Finished that. 3 years out of grad school, I tried to get something going in LA. Didn't really work. It's not a big theater town. For the idea of making a living doing theater in Los Angeles, I realized was nearly impossible. And then I moved to New York in 1998.
When you were at Irvine, I know this, but I forgot. Was Jerzy Kratowski at Irvine then?
That's a good question. He actually left like 2 years before I was there. But I met many of his people who studied with him.
Yeah. Because that was I know a long time ago. That was kind of that was the fame of Irvine.
Yes, it was. There were a lot of Jerzy Kratowski stories going around.
I'm sure there were. Cool. And we'll. I wish we had time to hear some of them, but I want to hear more about your stories. Oh. So then you went to New York and started this company, New York Classical, which has such an interesting, unique approach to the work of William Shakespeare. Talk a little bit. Well, first of all, if you wouldn't mind, I know you use the term panoramic, and in fact, you're writing a book about it.
I am right now. Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit about that, and then I'd love to ask you why.
Okay, so maybe I can answer both in the same thing. the origin of panoramic theater, and I didn't name it for quite some time, was the question of how do you perform Shakespeare outdoors without sound reinforcement, right? There's no mics. How can an actor do this? How can we perform particularly Shakespeare, things that are subtle emotions, things that are challenging to an actor? They feel they need the intimacy of the indoors, but how can we communicate that outdoors? So that was the initial impulse. It was, how do we do this? And panoramic theater evolved from that. First vocally, I've always worked very closely with vocal coaches on all my shows since my Irvine days. And I have several really, really strong vocal coach friends who work with me regularly, including one of the people she was an adjunct professor when I was a graduate student. And she's still working with me today. I'm very proud to say we figured this something like 26 years later, coming on our next show. And it's the next step from the vocal work was the blocking, the movement of the stage, and how that supported the vocal work. So it kind of really, I shouldn't say they were separate because they kind of evolved at the same time. And then I was also interested, I worked years ago for Gordon Davidson from the Mark Taper Forum. And Gordon had once said to me, he goes, every show should be an event. And it's something that's always stuck with me. I don't think it was just a show, but it's an event. What does that mean? So I wanted to make an event out of every show, and my passion behind it, the mission of the company is about creating and reinvigorating audiences for the theater, which is very different for New York, especially where you think, oh, it's a theater town. There are plenty of audiences. Well, reality is it's not. It is a theater town, but there are a lot of people who don't go to the theater. And I wanted to create a theater especially for those folks, or the folks, what I say, reinvigorating. I've seen everything, and now I want to see something different. I want to see it a different way. So putting all this together, we created panoramic theater, which is basically a combination of promenade theater, like very much like your movable theater, where the audience follows the action through a space. In our case, many large spaces, rather large spaces, and multi-acre spaces. And there's also environmental theater. So environmental theater where the audience is in the same space at the same time as the performers. In other words, they're sharing the same world. So that's through script adaptation. That's a whole other process that we've evolved. And the third part of panoramic theater is about the staging itself. And, the way we stage is modeled off late 19th century staging. And then we've created movement since that point. So it's a whole different technique that actors have to learn when they come to us. And it can be very challenging at times. And one of the things I like to say to actors is, if you're feeling like it's 100% wrong, it's probably completely right. So they're doing a lot of stuff they've been told never to do. We're asking them to do things that on stage that they were always taught, oh, no, you never do that. But you do that in panoramic theater. And so it's in some ways, it's extremely freeing. The rules that we set, many of our longtime people like the rules because they feel like, oh, God, this gives me a certain restriction, and then I can find creativity within that.
Yeah. I find it's pretentious to talk about a Picasso story, but I'm going to go ahead.
Go for it.
So, in terms of actors and unlearning things, I quoted a bit to Picasso, who always said that, you have to learn kind of the legit, I don't think Picasso said legit, but, the legitimate techniques to drawing. Mm-hmm. And then you're able to, sort of push the envelope. But without that foundation there, the work is going to suffer as you're expanding later on. And I find that with actors too. I find that when you ask, because what we do is different, particularly indoors, but we ask our actors to break some of the acting rules or particularly the theater culture rules. But the best the best people that do that are ones that have learned and have all the technique that they could ever want.
Mm-hmm.
Then are able to like reflect on that and go, oh, I don't have to do that. I can support
Mm-hmm.
an actor. And I suspect you find something similar to that.
I do. We did The Rivals a number of years ago, and we had a wonderful actress. Her name is Barbara Kingsley, and she's from Minneapolis, many years at the Guthrie and a lot of the other theaters around there. And Barbara said to me, Barbara's a senior actor, as we call in the business, right? She said to me, she's been acting for 40, 50 years. And she said to me, I'm just going to go for it. I'm just going to do what you tell me. And she found it so refreshing, because she was like, like almost the hell with the rules that I've experienced the last 50 years of my career. I'm just going to do something completely different. And she played Mrs. Malaprop, and it was just magical. And I loved it. I've had the good fortune to work with a number of senior actors who have illustrious careers, and they found such freedom in it. So yeah, it was great. It's great if you watch back to Picasso, if you look at retrospective, if you get a chance to see one early in his career, you wouldn't know him from, Manet. I mean, they would be the same, they're the same. And it's very, he can do very high realism if you see his earliest work. So I think that's correct. And there's a joy, I think, in that freedom from people.
So let me switch gears just a bit. Well, actually not. It's about something you mentioned before, about your audience. Now, I've been to at least 2 shows with your company,
Mm-hmm.
and what I've witnessed is a really diverse audience, remarkably so, which I applaud you for.
Thank you.
And not just socially, or racially diverse, but also economically diverse.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also an excitement there that I don't often witness at the theater, where people are oftentimes, they've been led to their seat and sitting down, and they're going to get their culture for the evening. They want to make sure that they can, they've got enough room on the armrest that the person next to them is. Anyway, so it's absolutely true about your company that you get such a diverse audience, and it was interesting to hear the phrase about people that don't normally go to the theater. So my question for you is, why? Like, why does it matter?
Well, I mean, okay, let me just say, so according to our last survey, approximately 30% of our audience lives at or below the New York City poverty line.
Mm.
And I was really pleased with that number, frankly. When it came out, it was a total shock. We didn't think it would be even remotely toward that. And what I know, because the economics of New York are such that these folks can't go to even a movie. They can't afford a movie. They can instead come to us, bring their entire family, and enjoy the show. Yeah. These folks have as much to get out of classical theater as anybody else. Our work is about families. It's about relationships with brothers and sisters and mothers and fathers. And yes, sure, there's a king thrown in here and there, maybe a lot of kings thrown here and there. But we all understand those things. And this was, for me, a missed area, if you will, in New York, a missed group of people that are overlooked, frankly, because you think of New York being this great cultural center, but it's a cultural center for people who have the $100 or more to see a show. Mm-hmm. And that's disposable income, not when they're struggling. So it's a great opportunity to introduce classical theater to your children at a very early age, at a very low stakes. You're not going to a Broadway kids show. I'm not going to name anything that you have to spend $250 or $300 a ticket, and then they melt down and need to run out. Yeah. My great fortune is I've had children grow up with us, And I literally have seen them from strollers, and now they're out of college. And a very exciting story. Recently, we just added a new board member who grew up with us.
Yeah. So remind me, when is the founding of?
It founded in 2000, so that's 21 years. It's a long time. It's a chance to see these people. Now these kids, if you will, these 20-somethings are coming with their friends.
Yeah.
Sometimes with spouses, sometimes with kids.
Yeah.
So it's become a family tradition, and that I think is really, really important.
That's great. That's great. Listen, you were talking, or I was talking in the bio about your production, The Fifth, which was interesting and also featured in a cartoon in New Yorker, which is
yes, it was awesome.
Yeah, I think it'll help people who don't know your work to maybe understand a bit about what your work is like. If you wouldn't mind describing that production.
Well, the basics is Battery Park, which is the southernmost tip of Manhattan on the island. That's the park you go to when you're about to get on the boat to go see the Statue of Liberty. So that's one of our grounds. We have about one of our spaces. We have 26 acres in that park that we use. We don't utilize all 26, but we use a good chunk of that. Our audience met there. And actually, let me backpedal just a little bit. So I read Norman Mailer's Naked and the Dead.
Mm-hmm.
And wonderful book. The whole first section is all about being on a boat on the way to war in the Far East. Mm-hmm. And what the soldiers were experiencing. And I felt that was really critical, because something that Shakespeare's Henry V overlooks is that trip. It's not there. Mm-hmm. It's not there. And going across the English Channel is a scary, and it's still scary, but it really was a scary time when you were in a sailboat that 400 plus years ago, more than that, way more than that. That was Shakespeare's time. Even Shakespeare's time, it was very scary. So I thought about what is that experience, and if our audience is in the same world as our performers, should they not also experience this portion? So in short, the audience met in Battery Park, which was England for us. After a few scenes, the entire audience boarded a ferry boat, and we all went to Governor's Island, which is just an island right across New York Harbor, about a 20-minute boat ride from where we are. On the boat, we actually did a scene. We had to do the same scene 3 times, because there were 3 levels to the boat, so the actors had to do the exact same scene in 3 different blocking setups. And so by the time we did it 3 times, we exactly pretty much got right over to Governor's Island. That was then France. So in France, we had stowed ahead of time a bunch of actors there. Governor's Island has a castle. Actually, it's got 2, but we used one. That was Harfleur. And the audience marched up to Harfleur and watched the actors. We had a cast and crew of 50 on the show, and engaged in battle. And at the end of the show, we went back to the Battery, where actually there is also another castle, Castle Clinton, and that was Henry's castle, with a slight adjustment of one line in the play. We ended the play. The play actually ends in France, but we ended it back in England. And I was thinking a lot about something you know very well, dropping your kids off at college. People drop kids off at college. They don't expect college to come to them. So we decided that the King of France would deliver the princess, Catherine, to Henry at Henry's castle. And we ended up back in the Battery. So it was a round trip, lots of fun, lots of sword fighting. And we got to tell a wonderful story.
One of the things I remember distinctly is, as Stephen mentioned, as the actors follow the audience follows the actors. One thing I remember distinctly was in Governor's Island, and by the way, the day I saw it was like record-breaking heat.
The whole thing was hot.
It was like 100 degrees or something like that. I mean, I'm not exaggerating. And the audience was taken to Governor's Island, and there was a scene early on, but then there was the scene moved to another part of the island, and I believe the actors ran as they exited, and the audience got up and ran after them.
That's right.
And they didn't just sort of follow; they were like, "Man, we're with you, and we want to get the best seat too."
That's correct.
But that was an incredible thing that they were so into this world that not only were they investing the time, uh, and the energy in this hot, awful, hot day, but they were investing their physical self in it. It was really quite remarkable.
We really enjoyed that. I think it happens a lot in most of our venues. And I think that's very appealing, for example, to kids.
Yeah.
They love running after the actors.
Yeah.
Even in the scenes that don't require the audience to run. But there was a beautiful thing about, there's one particular battle where the audience ran into battle following the performers. You probably remember that.
Yeah.
And that, so the audience was as winded as the actors
Yeah.
or as the soldiers.
Yeah.
And that gave an additional adrenaline push to everybody. And I think that's really exciting because, it's a number of years before we had done a Macbeth, and we finished it, and I got a comment that said, I think it was emailed to me or maybe by post back then. I maybe got a letter, and it said something like, I was hot and sweaty at the end of Macbeth, and that's how I should feel. And it's right. Every director would want the audience to feel that heat and that sweat of that battle. And in fact, they did.
You could put that in quotes in your poster.
Right. There you go. Hot and sweaty.
Cool. A question I'd like to ask. I think you've identified what's different about how you're different in that environment in New York theater, which is of course very famous and full. But you've been working in Shakespeare performance for a few decades now. What do you witness? What do you think is the most important difference between when you started in the work and where you are now? Whether it's in the Shakespeare environment as a whole, or whether it's a personal thing. Either one.
That's really good. I don't think I've ever been asked that question. My first response comes as a practitioner, if you will, which is there has been a lot of practical changes. We did, when I had done that Merchant of Venice in 1988, we had 4, maybe 5 weeks of rehearsal. And now we have under 3.
Yeah.
And that, of course, means we have something usually at the beginning of rehearsal called table work, where we work on the text with the actors, and that's kind of gone and that's out the window. Mm-hmm. I'm very blessed, I should say, with performers in New York City who are top notch on top of their career. And I know I can rely on them to do all that work by themselves before they get into rehearsal. I think in the 80s, when I really started, the kind of toward the mid to late 80s, there was a lot more conceptual focus on Shakespeare, high concept, real deep investment. One of the greatest performances on my top 5 list of my life was a Coriolanus I saw at the Old Globe in San Diego. And Byron Jennings played Coriolanus, and Dickon Matthews played Menelaus, and it was done as an Oliver. Coriolanus was based on the Oliver North story, for those people who in your audience who recall that. And there were live TV cameras on stage and TV monitors in stage left and stage right, and it was very interactive. There was the big war in the beginning, was broken up by ethnicity, African Americans versus Latinx and people. It was really fascinating and of its time. I think it's softened since then to some extent. It's not been about, oh my God, I have to come up with the next concept that's going to exactly fit something perfectly. Yeah. That was the late, great John Hirsch, by the way. That was his second to last production of his life. He was another amazing, amazing director. And I feel very fortunate to have seen that. I think today there's less of that worry and we still see some very high-tech work. It's expensive. And that's hard to stomach a little bit. I remember the first professional show I worked on, the managing director in the theater was very kind, and he showed me their budget, and it was $300,000. And this was
that's 1980s dollars.
That was $1980.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And as you and I know now, that's nothing. That's nothing.
Yeah.
So even for, not a full equity company, that's nothing. So, things have changed. Things have changed really radically.
Well, it still seems like a lot to me.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It is, but it's also not. We do a lot more with a lot less.
I wonder this idea of the high concept in that, because I'm so interested in the evolution of Shakespeare performance. Let me just mention two things. One thing, I don't remember the book, but it's not my idea. It's somebody else's idea that performance in Shakespeare is always an attempt to become more realistic, whatever that means. And that even what the Victorians were doing or the Romantics were doing, is they were putting dozens and dozens of people on stage, so it would look more like a battle. So it'd be a more realistic battle. And then in the court, in the court scenes, you'd have all this pomp and circumstance and lots of people, and that was an attempt to be realistic. And then, of course, the post-Victorians were like, well, that's not how people act. And so they, and everybody seems to be a reaction to the previous kind of prominent style as a way to make it more, maybe not even realistic, more real. That's probably a better word. Whether that means realism or naturalism or theatricalism or whatever the style is. But I wonder if some of that conceptual stuff was really rooted in that famous Peter Brook Midsummer Night's Dream.
It's largely possible. I mean, a lot of the directors who were directing it at that time were very active in the early 70s when that happened. Was it 72, wasn't it, or something?
Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know the exact year. And that would have been definitely in the milieu.
Yeah.
It wasn't, I don't remember it being spoken about. I remember hearing about it and seeing clips, later. But that would definitely, Peter Brook broke a lot of walls, broke down a lot of walls with that, and that did change things. The one thing that I will say, I think now is, or maybe at least I'll speak for myself. I'm reacting to the other media that's out there, the other forms of media. They're all wonderful, whether it's like this on Zoom, or it's TV or film, or whatever it is. Virtual reality, whatever it is, these are all wonderful. I'm looking for something that's unique, is a unique live experience that you cannot replicate. And I think a lot of us and who are working today are looking for those things. We're looking not to, again, I'm coming from LA originally, and the big thing, one thing was, I was like, I don't ever want to ever put a TV pilot on stage. I don't want to do a stage show that really should be filmed. I want to do something that's unique and that's only can be seen in the theater. And I feel like a lot of the work we do all the work we do, that's one of the lenses I look through. Can it only be done this way?
It's interesting. We're recording this. Who knows with this quarantine how long and what the story will eventually be. Mm-hmm. But right now it's we're in the end of April, so we're right in the middle of it, and a lot of us are thinking about, not just practitioners, but I think audiences too, like thinking about what it is about live theater that can't be done in a Zoom chat or can't be done in any other medium. So that certainly not just high in the mind of you and your work, but I think probably everybody else will be catching up to that as well.
I think so too. And the question always to me is like, what is better in another medium?
Yeah.
And where the strengths of that medium. So I'm always looking to the theatrical medium and saying, what are the strengths?
Yeah.
And what can we do that's not going to be seen anywhere else, and that's going to keep us going.
One of those things I think is that idea of the event.
Yes, the live event. Yeah.
It's hard to have an event on TV. I mean, you can throw a party, but I think that can make a difference.
Right. Or Dick Clark.
What's that?
Like Dick Clark, yes.
Yeah, yeah.
American Bandstand,
Yes,
yes.
that's right. That's right.
In Baltimore, yeah.
What was the Dick Clark rockin' New Year's Eve?
You're rocking New Year's Eve.
Right. Okay. So I think we're running a little short of time, but we have to do our lightning round.
All right.
It's required by law, which I ask you ridiculous, stupid questions. Well, maybe they're all ridiculous, but maybe they're all stupid questions, and you have to answer them quickly, my friend. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Least favorite Shakespeare play?
Timon of Athens.
Kirk or Picard?
Picard.
A word in Shakespeare that you love?
Forsooth.
Nice. Most superfluous Shakespeare character? Most dispensable Shakespeare character?
Cornelius, second ambassador to Norway.
Godfather 3, yes or no?
No.
Yeah, there aren't correct answers to any of these except for that one, and you did the correct.
I really wanted to like it.
Sullied or solid?
Sullied.
And lastly, your favorite play in the world, doesn't have to be Shakespeare, your favorite play in the world.
Is Hamlet.
Hamlet.
No question. No question. Done it a couple of times. Yeah, there's no, I can't seem to top that.
Yeah. Well, Stephen Burdman, thank you so much for
Thank you, Ian.
With us. Always a joy to talk with you.
And look forward to many more.
Yeah. And thanks everyone for watching.
Thanks for having me.